So now, without further ado, Jennifer, Jen, as you prefer to be called, welcome to our webinar. Thank you very much indeed for giving up your time today. We really appreciate it because we know that you're a very busy person. Jen and 19 other volunteers actually run their own organisation. So this is to be applauded because volunteer-led organisations where nobody is taking a salary are really special. And your particular charity and organisation is set up in the East Midlands. And I don't want to steal your presentation, Jen, but I do want to congratulate you for all you've achieved. It's a fine balance. They have done the most amazing work trying to encourage tenants to let people, trying to encourage landlords to allow tenants to have cats. And their work has been recognised at a national level. So Jen is seen as an advisor to the All Parliamentary Group on cats, and she's part of a national campaign to bring in Jasmine's Law, which you're going to hear about later. And she is consulted with by Andrew Rosendale, MP. And when I was talking about Jen to our own public affairs team, they see Jen as being a real partner. So I do want to say, Jen, congratulations, because from very small beginnings, what you and your colleagues have managed to achieve is outstanding. And from something that was starting in the East Midlands to have that sort of UK-wide respect and being seen for your expertise is really fantastic. It's so good. I met Jen a few months ago, and we had such a good chat, and I was really taken with her energy and the way that she talks about the work they do. And it's really fabulous to see people who are not turning the wheel on anything, who have that. And I felt like I found a bit of a like-minded soul, Jen, is that if you're going to do anything, don't do it half-hearted, do it full pelt. And you know, really putting your heart and soul into it. So it is a great thing. So I'm going to ask you, Jen, if you, it's a couple of minutes early, but hey, let's give you a little bit more of the floor. Why not? So I'm now going to hand over to you, but can I ask you all to give Jen a great big, I know it's a silent clap, but you've got reactions, but can you all just show your appreciation, please? Thank you very much.
Right, just bear with me one moment while the technology hopefully behaves for me. It's looking good so far. And there we go. Morning, everybody. I will try and live up to that fantastic introduction by Charlotte. So let's see where we go with this. And welcome to AdvoCATS. I have bouncing paw prints throughout, so hopefully they won't get too annoying for you. Let's start off with who AdvoCATS are. They are myself, Jen Battersea. I'm married, I have 6 cats, a long-suffering husband, and my background is in sales administration and advertising. And pictured with me there is Lil Fat Luby. I have Lisa Starr, who is married with a baby boy who turns 1 this Friday. She has 2 cats, 4 dogs, a horse, numerous rabbits and guinea pigs, a very long-suffering husband, and she works as a vet nurse. And she's pictured there with Pebbles, who's about 18, 19 years old now. And we have Carla Frampton. She is married with 1 dog, 1 cat, a relieved husband, and she is also another vet nurse. She also runs a company called Life of Riley Homes with her husband. They buy and renovate properties and rent them out specifically to people with pets. And we love her for doing that. And bottom right of the screen there is our mascot, Holmes the cat. A little play on words there. That was a competition winner when we very first launched to name him. That's Holmes the cat. And with Carla, that's Mog, our mascot that comes out on information days. And is very, very popular with young children especially. As Charlotte mentioned, there are now 20 of us. There's a couple more who were there right from the beginning that they prefer to stay in the background, and they're there to bounce ideas off and future directions off and that sort of thing. And who does what? There's a number of different roles within AdvoCATS. We have our caseworkers. They're the ones that are landlord and tenant facing. They deal with lettings agencies. They go out to see the tenant. They're responsible for compiling the paperwork that we produce, which I'll discuss in more detail in a little while. We have team advocate. These are people who will come out and do a couple of hours every time we do an information day. Again, I'll be talking about the information days a little bit more as well. We have our sales team. We fundraise mainly by doing car boot sales. In fact, we did our very first one for probably about 18 months on Saturday just gone. And anything that we get donated that is too good for a boot sale, they will actively sell on platforms like eBay and Marketplace. And we have a couple of internet watch cats. They keep an eye on sites such as Marketplace and Gumtree for either landlords advertising properties but specifying no pets, or tenants posting that they're desperate to try and find somewhere that will allow pets, and they will communicate with them and see if we can get in and offer our services. Some of the volunteers have dual roles. We have people who are responsible for agency, vet and rescue liaison. And we do also have our very own Chancellor of the Exchequer, who looks after all our funds for us. Our mission is based purely on this. We know that many landlords and agencies use no pets clauses in their contracts. We also know there is the ability to negotiate on some of these. There are some very hardline people who will never say yes to pets, but we know it is possible to overturn a no decision. And our mission can be clearly spelled out as campaign, action, teach, and support. We'll go through those one by one. Campaign. I mentioned the information days. That centre image is actually at our launch day in Long Eaton back in 2018. We have a banner, we have a table, we have Flag Day stickers, and we just talk to people and interact with them and spread the fact that AdvoCATS exists and how it can help. And we have had casework coming from people who said, oh, I was talking to my friend about the problem I have, and they said, why don't you try AdvoCATS? So that's very gratifying when that happens. We have our press and media coverage. We have a retired features writer who does our press releases for us. And this year we've seen a huge increase in the number of articles that mention us, from the Observer, the actual Observer. It was only a tiny mention, but it was in the actual Observer. Your Cat magazine, Landlord Zone and Landlord Today, Pet Business World, Vet Community. And in the pipeline, we're due to have an article in Westies and Besties, Insurance Post, and Companion, the British Small Animal Vets Association monthly journal. We have our social media presence. We've got, I think it's about 1,580 likes for our page on Facebook, and just over 1,100 followers on Twitter. Charlotte mentioned our colour being purple. We recently celebrated our 3rd birthday, and not being able to go anywhere, we did it Twitter style with the hashtag AdvoCATSPurple. And it was an incredible day. I spent 14 hours on Twitter. It was a very long day, but it was incredible and very, very rewarding, as we picked up over 170 new followers in just that one day. We also have a burgeoning LinkedIn presence, which has been extremely useful. Jasmine's Law and amending the Tenant Fees Act are part of what we campaign for, and I will be discussing them in more detail a little bit later on. Action. We coordinate and compile the documentation, samples of which I shall be showing you shortly. And then we offer as much or as little help to the tenant as they want from us. We can just give them the electronic copies of all the documentation, and they go off and speak to landlords and lettings agents themselves. Or if they identify specific properties that they're interested in, we do not act as a property finding organisation, but if they tell us about some properties they're interested in and which agencies, we can actually make the first approach for them and see what can be done. Developing local relationships. We have great support locally. Local radio station Erewash Sound is hugely supportive of us and always mentioning the things that we're doing. And in that middle image there is Maggie Throop, our local MP, who has been on board with what we're trying to achieve right from the very beginning. And we have the lettings agents. We've developed very good relationships with a lot of them. We offer a free information pack for them to have in branch, and that's bottom left, that's Mia doing a little bit of quality control before they're taken out to the various branches. They consist of an information leaflet holder with leaflets for landlords and tenants in, a couple of pens, because that's a great way for people to remember our name in branch, some business cards and a poster. And those are all provided free of charge. As I say, to lettings agencies, we also have them in vets. Teach. Before COVID, we were attending local meetings of organisations such as the National Residential Landlords Association, the Association of Residential Lettings Agents, and locally a group called EMPO, which is East Midlands Property Owners. Since lockdown, we've been attending various webinars for AdvoCATS, the parliamentary group on cats and cats protection. And we were on a panel hosted by the online landlords forum Property Tribes. As part of our daily work, we're speaking to landlords and lettings agencies, and we're educating them a lot of the time as to what constitutes responsible pet ownership and why they should be considering letting to pets. We'll offer advice on behavioural problems. The leaflet there, Happy Homes for Happy Cats, that's a double-sided A4 leaflet, which we wrote in conjunction with a local vets here, covering the 3 most common inappropriate behaviours. So that's scratching, inappropriate toileting, and spraying. And those leaflets are available free from any of our information days and are given out to any clients that we take on. And we're currently working on our indoor cat initiative. There's a big misconception out there that all cats have to have outside space, which, as I'm sure we all know, is not the case. And there's certainly room for educating people that indoor cats exist, why they have to be indoor, and opening up the possibilities of pet ownership to tenants in properties which may never have been deemed suitable for cats before, i.e. flats and apartments. So that's something quite important we're working on at the moment with an 8-page leaflet that we're designing. And support. Sometimes the client just wants to know they're not battling on alone. It can be a numbers game, and it can be quite soul destroying when you get no after no after no. But when you get that chink and you're able to talk to someone and get a result, then it makes all the hard work worth it, and you've kept that person going until they find their new home. If you'll just excuse me to have a quick sip of my drink. I mentioned the documentation that we provide. This is the sort of thing we put together. We do our own independent tenant check. It has to be scrupulously honest. There is no point in not being so. If we turn up to a tenant's place and we find that they've got 5 huge Rottweilers chained up in a tiny backyard and 27 kittens in the bathroom, we'll walk away from that case, because that in no way, shape or form is responsible pet ownership. we encourage the tenant to take pictures of where they're currently living, particularly focusing on areas which can tend to show damage, like carpet at the foot of stairs and so on. We obtain a vet reference. This form has been designed and worded with a member of the RCVS to ensure that vets would be happy to put their name and or their practice name to the document. And everybody's favourite, the pet CV. This is specifically about the animal or animals in question. It talks about their character, their health, whether they're indoor, outdoor, and so on and so forth. Both the tenant check and the pet CV will cover the fact that the animal is hopefully neutered, microchipped, flea and worm treated, vaccinated, that arrangements are in place for when the person goes on holiday, and so on and so forth. Case studies and some pictures of cats that we've worked with. This is Kiwi and Coco, two incredibly cute kittens. Their owners, their new staff, approached their landlord and were told that yes, they could have a pair of kittens, which they duly got. The landlord then found out that there was a head lease on the building of flats, and that prohibited pets. Head leases are notoriously difficult to overturn and usually only possible if the animal is an assistance animal. So they went out looking for somewhere else to rent, and they found a property. They mentioned to the agency that they had two kittens, and the agency told them to get in touch with us to have the AdvoCATS paperwork done. And that's the first referral that we've had back from an agency. So that was a great case to work on. This is the Bobster. Bobster is an absolutely gorgeous, slightly chunky tabby who is an FIV cat. So he is an indoor cat. His dad was relocating to the area as part of the transport police, had found a property, but as with many cases, if you find a pet-friendly property, there's usually a lot of people trying to apply for it. And it was our paperwork that made his application stand out. And he and Bobster are now happily settled in their new home. Third case study is Simba and his best mate, Lucy. Their mum was a victim of landlord fraud once and very nearly twice. Just days before she was due to move into her new home, she found out that it was all smoke and mirrors and the property wasn't actually there. We arranged emergency foster care for Simba. Lucy went with her mum to stay at a family member's house. Cat and dog cases can be particularly difficult because you're dealing with two potential sets of problems. But we worked with Julie in this case, and we put together our paperwork. It was a very difficult, complex case. Julie was moving away from an area to get away from an abusive ex, and there were areas that were within her budget that she simply wouldn't consider for that reason. So we had to be very mindful of that. She had also got a CCJ against her, a county court judgment. This is something that had been run up by her ex, but in her name. And she didn't have anybody within the family who could be a guarantor. The case went on and on. We were in month 2 when she very nearly became victim to another landlord fraud, a woman advertising a property and looking to avoid time wasters. So she was asking people to pay the £500 deposit up front before she'd even arrange a viewing. And then the deposit would be refunded either as part of rent or if she wasn't chosen for the property. This sounded very, very dodgy for us. We Googled the woman's name. We found all sorts of comments about her and about the fraudulent cases and people being conned out of, in some cases, over £1,000. It was reported to the police. It does seem to be a known thing. She didn't own the property. The certificate she had proving property ownership was actually a forged Australian document. It was fairly horrendous. But after 3 months, I'm very pleased to say that we were able to find a private landlord who would consider Julie, who listened to us, who checked us out online, and was happy to proceed. Julie moved into her property just before Christmas and has since been allowed to adopt a second cat, which means Simba doesn't annoy Lucy as much as he used to. Here's some of our reporters. Charlotte mentioned Andrew Rossendale. He is the MP for Romford in Essex, and he was the one responsible for introducing his bill, Jasmine's Law. And I will talk about Jasmine's Law in a bit more detail in a moment. Battersea, of course, have been incredibly good to us, as have Cats Protection. Property Tribes is the online forum that I mentioned I was on a panel for about pets in rented properties. Your Cat magazine did an article on us in the summer of 2019, and they're scheduling a follow-up article for early autumn, which is great. One Broker Insurance offer a pet damage insurance policy with a link through our website, which means if anybody actually purchases that particular policy from that link, we do get a little kickback, which in fundraising terms is very welcome. There's the National Residential Landlords Association, Generation Rent, the tenants campaign group, Open Rent, which is an online platform for independent private landlords, and Nottingham City Homes, who were keen to work for us, developing their pet-friendly policy and looking to be able to allow more pets in supported accommodation. We're very lucky to have all these supporters and more behind us. Just a little bit of background now on the Tenant Fees Act 2019. The Act was introduced with an aim to regulate fees and charges made by landlords and agencies that were in some cases ridiculous and in a small minority of cases totally ludicrous. It set a deposit cap of 5 weeks rent that a landlord could ask for up front, and that is listed within a section of the Act called the List of Permitted Payments. What it meant, though, was that landlords were no longer able to charge a separate pet deposit, which had always been the norm if you were renting with pets. Jasmine's Law, the hashtag a pet in every home, was Andrew's 10-minute members bill, private members bill, which had its first reading in October last year. It sailed through its first reading, and I put an article about it on the Property Tribes Landlord Forum, which got a lot of antagonistic responses, I have to say, from some very hardcore landlords who were anti-pets. But what was coming out of what they were saying was the need for them to be able to recoup any costs of damages made by any of pets that they did allow in their properties. And they were saying that the rent cap of 5 weeks just simply did not allow them enough for some of the worst case scenarios. I asked if insurance was perhaps an option, and there didn't seem to be much knowledge of any policies that existed for this. So with the blessing of Andrew's office, I went off and researched and produced the Heads for Tails Pet Damage Insurance Report. And that was debuted at Andrew's webinar in February of this year. That his bill, Jasmine's Law, was due to have its second reading then, but because of COVID and lockdown and parliamentary protocol, it never got that chance. So he had a webinar talking about it anyway. His bill, he freely admits, is highly unlikely to become law. But what it has done is really stimulated debate at a national level about pets in rented properties and about making things fairer for tenants and for landlords. because I think if the last 18 months has taught us anything, it's the value of animal companionship, particularly for those who live alone. Going forward, we're looking to restart our local activity. As I mentioned, we did our first car boot sale at the weekend, and we're looking to hopefully start doing information days again from the autumn. We'll continue to work with Westminster. And very interestingly, I have a little bit of stop press news for you. We're looking to campaign to change the Tenant Fees Act so that its list of permitted payments includes the right for a landlord to request that pet damage insurance is held for anyone wanting to bring a pet into his property. And Andrew has just been selected for something called a ballot bill, which is another type of private member's bill, but has a little bit more kudos. It carries a little bit more weight and priority within Westminster. And we are actually actively lobbying for support for him to use that bill to get the Tenant Fees Act list of permitted payments amended. If for any reason that doesn't happen, or he chooses it, but it doesn't progress as far as we'd like, there is the Renters Reform Bill this autumn, and it's quite possible we might be able to tie a little bit of legislation or a campaign on the back of that to get the amendment through. There's a number of ways for people to get involved with AdvoCATS. First of all, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both is @AdvoCATSEM. Certainly on Facebook, we like to provide a lively mix of news, factual information, and the best cat memes that we can find. You can direct people to our website, which is www.advocatseastmids.org.uk. On there, as well as the link through to the insurance product, there's also a DIY tips page, which includes a template for a pet CV that can be downloaded. And this is for people who are outside our immediate area, but we are always at the end of a phone for a chat if anybody wants some advice wherever they live. And if you're at all local to the East Midlands, or if you know somebody in the area who you think might be interested, you could of course join us, which would be great. And I'll finish now and ask if Charlotte's had any questions through.
I certainly have, Jen, but before I get to those questions, a really big thanks to you for such an informative and insightful presentation. It's for any cat lovers, it's really heartening to know that there are people like you and your colleagues in your organisation who are trying to create more homes for cats, because that then opens up opportunities for rescue cats to find their rightful places in those homes. So I see our relationship with your organisation as a really fruitful one. It benefits everybody. Jen,
we do say, if I can just very, very quickly say, we do say that it's an absolute scandal that pets who had perfectly good, loving and responsible homes find themselves in rescue centres, taking up valuable space for genuine strays and hardship cases to be pushed further and further down the list. We think that's a scandal, and anything we can do to alleviate that, we will do.
And more power to your elbow. Jen, I'm going to ask you please to close your last slide, and that way we can see everybody's faces again. Hello. I always expect to see people doing their ironing at this point, or doing their yoga exercises. I have got some questions for you, Jen, but I'm just going to indulge myself really quickly because I don't want to forget this while it's in my head. You had a slide of a cat, and there was clearly a tweet going on around whether or not the landlord would take a cat. And then underneath he said, okay, I'll take this cat because he looks polite.
Yes.
And I've tweeted it. I laughed so much because I realized that non-pet owners, they don't get us. They don't get the people who love dogs and cats. And I know that we have over 25% of the country now has a dog or a cat, but over 75% don't.
Yeah.
And so and we can't just assume, and some people just don't like animals, but there are people who are very easily pushed over onto our side. I think there'll be many of us here who may well be in relationships and partnerships with people who weren't that bothered about having a dog or a cat, but you worked your ways and now you have a dog or a cat in your home. But it's the same with other people. If you actually talk about a specific animal, and if a landlord knows that it's a 10-year-old cat and he's a house cat and he's not going to do this and he's not going to be screaming outside terrorizing all the local cats, I think it's something where you can convince people, which leads me to, I'm not going to read these questions out in any particular order because there's a question from Angela here, who is one of our London volunteers, and it's really about conversion rate. And I'm also interested in your thoughts here. So what is your estimated conversion rate, i.e. what percentage of landlords or agents who had originally had a no cats / pets policy, who then later changed their views and policies? So if you can hit us with some data and stories about that, we'd be really interested, please, Jen.
We have about a 70% success rate. Wow. Based on the casework that we've been doing. And as you say, there's some easy ones and there's some difficult ones. Certainly in some instances, the landlord may not actually know that their rental contract says no pets in it because they've just used the standard contract used by the lettings agency. And they say to us, oh, if somebody asked me about a pet, it would probably, well, I'd consider it. And we have to point out that if the contract says no pets, that is going to deter probably the 90% of people from even asking the question because they don't want to rock the boat of their tenancy. So we always say it is worth asking if it says no pets, and you get some easy conversions like that. You then get ones who are really not sure about having a pet in their property. They're concerned about fleas, for example. And you say to them, well, look, this animal has got a vet reference. It has regular monthly flea treatment. You're not going to get a problem with fleas in your property. Previous landlord references are worth their weight in gold. And we really have the whole spectrum of the easy conversion to the case study there with Simba and Lucy. The landlord there was happy about the cat, really wasn't sure about the dog, so was reassured with our paperwork there. A couple that we helped right back at the very, very beginning had a cat and a dog. The dog was a lurcher, and with a little bit of research as well, we found out that lurchers were one of the least destructive breeds. So we were able to feed that information in. And it's having the time to do that. We don't expect a lettings agent to have the time or resource to get in there and fact find about the animals involved. And that's where we come in, because the service that we offer is free. We do always say that, donations are very welcome, but the actual work that we do is free. It's not based on somebody giving us a donation or anything like that.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. I have a question. Picking up on your work is free, I think is so important, because you've got quite an official sounding name, AdvoCATS. It sounds a bit like Citizens or Cats Advice Bureau, and
Yeah.
people might think that you're receiving some sort of government funding.
Nope.
So I think that's an important message to get out, that you are totally reliant on donations. So
donations and sales of items, so like the car boot sales or selling things on eBay. We recently had some vinyl donated to us, and we've made about £115 on eBay so far just by selling that. So we also have a sponsor that hosts our website for us, which is quite a big thing. But yeah, it's donations and it's our own fundraising. We don't receive any grants or anything like that.
Thank you for telling us that, because we will keep that very much in mind. I might send you my old Shawaddy Waddy records and you can flog those on eBay.
They were the first group I saw live.
They'll be worth a fortune. You did mention about the benefits of cats and companion animals in alleviating in loneliness. Emma, one of our London volunteers, has said, do you also work with landlords or residential homes for the elderly, as a cat would be a wonderful companion for anyone suffering from loneliness?
That's a really difficult one, because yes, I agree. My late mother was in a residential home, and they did have a lady there who had been given permission to bring her cat in, an elderly cat that basically didn't move from her room. I know a lot of the time the objections that come up for that are, what if somebody has an allergy? What if somebody has a phobia? Elderly people can tend to have very fragile skin. What if the cat just sort of baps their hand but actually causes quite a nasty cut? We don't, is the short answer to that. We don't work with residential homes. We have had some case studies, and we do work with Nottingham City Homes in their sheltered accommodation. A lot of those types of properties have communal gardens and or communal doors, and the argument has always been, similarly with the private rented sector, that a cat would need to have access to a garden, but no, not if they're an indoor cat. And we know of 2, 3, maybe more than that, cases where someone has asked for permission, has had indoor cats explained, and has been able to get a pet. And we know a lot of lone tenants are living in smaller properties, so that might be a 1-bedroom flat or something like that. And at the moment, they're largely cut off from the benefits of pet ownership. And our indoor cat initiative is something that we're hoping will change a lot of perceptions.
Okay. Another question here is from Sue, who I believe should probably had a job as a police officer in another life. She has said, it's very, very sort of, it's a good question. Are you confident that your checks would weed out people who might get an animal purely to get rented accommodation in properties that are for animal owners only? I don't know if you've come across that at all.
We haven't, no. I mean, as I mentioned, co-founder Carla, who runs Life of Riley Homes. Normally you've got the history of someone with their pet. The vast majority of our work is with people who already have pets and are looking to move within the rental sector. So you have the history of the animal, you have the vet reference. So I think it's fairly unlikely that would happen. And I think those of us volunteers that are caseworkers would be able to sniff that out if we were suspicious about something. We've got a fairly good sixth sense for something that's not quite right. Okay,
so you're on your guard for anybody trying to abuse your trust on these matters. And Sheila has said that the Cinnamon Trust produces a book on pet-friendly care homes. So that's good for all of us to know.
That's very interesting. I'm going to write a note of that down. I've heard of the Cinnamon Trust.
They are normally they work with people who want their dogs walked, but this is another part of their work. So yeah, definitely worth a look at. And Sheila has followed up her observation with saying they get their volunteers all over the country to go out to homes who are willing to assess their friendliness. So also good to know.
Yeah.
Scott Fryer, who I think you know, who works on our public affairs team.
Hi, Scott.
He has asked about the best ways you found to get no pet landlords to change their minds. Chocolate always works for me. But how do you get people to change their minds, Jen?
It's through communication. It's talking to them about that they may never have owned a pet in their life, which you mentioned was a possibility. 75% of the population doesn't have a pet. They may not have pets. So it is an education thing. It is having the backup of the paperwork. There's one case study which is actually on our website, but I will quote it now. On paper, Ruth looked like the landlord's worst nightmare. She was a newly single mum. She had 2 daughters, 3 cats and a dog. She wasn't on the tenancy of where she was living at the time because it was in her partner's name. She was still living there while she looked for somewhere else to move to. So we did the usual. We did the vet reference, we did the tenant check, we did the pet CVs. She was the first case where we suggested that she took pictures of where she was currently living. And that's now something that we do standard across all cases. We also suggested that she got character references, not just for herself, but to see if the children's schools would provide something, because we'd met both kids and they were lovely. They were so well behaved. And she came through with all of that. The schools wrote glowing references, and she was one of the more independent clients. So she took the copies of everything and went off. She was shortlisted for 3 properties and she got the one that she wanted. And her landlord had said that she was really impressed with the level of information that had been provided, because people who really aren't that bothered aren't necessarily going to go to that trouble, I think, in a lot of instances. So it shows the landlord that this really means something to them, and they've invested this time and what have you into getting this information put together. And I think that's a big part of what does change minds, is the effort that obviously goes into all the paperwork that comes together. It's also our pedigree. We are lucky enough to have some really big names in the rental sector and in the rescue sector who back us, who understand what we're doing and are willing to sort of stand alongside us and say, you know, yes, this is a problem. And I think that the more of those names that we collect, the more kudos we have, the more likely people then are to listen to us. It's kind of an evolving thing.
You're certainly building up an enviable reputation for being really honest brokers. We have 6 minutes left and we have 2 questions.
Okay.
There might be a few more that pop in. I'm going to try and deal with these as quickly as possible. First question here from Rosie Price, our volunteer services manager. I like this. She's asked you, she'd love to know what inspired you to start AdvoCATS. So what was that defining moment that made you think, yep, I'm going to do this?
I'll do this quickly because there was actually 2 defining moments. The first one was a rescue that I was volunteering for. In fact, me and the co-founders were volunteering for. There was a guy who wanted to get a cat. He lived in a flat. Flat was owned by the housing association. They said no pets. My mum had rented from them before and been allowed a pet, so I challenged this. They explained the communal door, communal garden thing. I said, fine, what about indoor cats? Long story short, they'd never heard of indoor cats, wrote them a letter, and he's now had his cat for about 4 years. So that proved that it could be done. Before that, it was my goddaughter, and she knows I tell this story. She's absolutely fine with it. She got married in 2015. She lives down south to a young lad who had some fairly hefty mental health problems. And just after they got married, they moved into a new flat, which had 3 big bedrooms, so his 2 sons from a previous relationship could come and stay, and she had her 2 cats with her. Everything was looking rosy. We think it was looking a little bit too rosy for Darren, because 7 weeks to the day after they got married, he drove headfirst into a fire engine. And it was just the most dreadful, awful, awful time. Bex, of course, was just broken and in bits. The boys' mother, after a month or so, stopped them seeing her because she was in such a state it wasn't doing them any good. She had to do what was best for her boys, but it was another loss for Bex. Bex tried to keep the flat on, but couldn't afford it on her own. She had some fairly disastrous experiences with lodgers, but eventually had to admit defeat and move to a smaller property that didn't allow pets. And that's when I got the SOS call, being the mad cat lady. Can you help me find a home for my pets? And I did, eventually. 11th hour, it was 11th hour, but I did. And I drove down to Southampton, and the worst thing I have ever done in my life was load her cats into the back of my car and drive away from her. It was hideous. It was just absolutely hideous. And that was in my mind. And when we found out that we could change some landlords' names and we thought there was a problem we could do something about, we just decided to go for it. I will add a quick footnote now that Bex is in a new relationship. She's in her 2nd year of training to be a mental health nurse. And she has 2 cats again.
I thank you for sharing that. If anything demonstrates the need for, or the driver for you doing what you do and your fellow volunteers, it's that story.
It so delayed her recovery. She was in a dreadful depression for a long time, and it would have been shorter, not necessarily better, but shorter and easier perhaps if she'd been able to keep hold of her cats.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. The final observation does dovetail into what you said, insofar as Rosie said, it's a shame that renters have to jump through so many hoops to show that they'll be good renters with and without animals, and it can be a scary process. So yes, it's great that we have charities such as yours supporting people. And I think that's what defines your organisation, is yes, you're there for the cats, which is great because we're all here for animals, but you're here for people who are also in really vulnerable situations, struggling with their mental health, with loneliness, going through bereavement, and facing the challenges of life, which would be alleviated to some degree if they could have their pet with them. Yes. So this is great work you all do. You're going to be joining us again after the break.
Yeah.
And Jen, we're all going to give you that big virtual round of applause now for being so authentic and just a superb speaker. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really been an honour to come and speak to all your volunteers today.
Well, good luck to you and everything you do.